Good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's event, Implementing Action for Peacekeeping, Troop Contributing Countries as Key Stakeholders. My name is Jake Sherman. I'm the director of IPI's Brian Urquhart Center for Peace Operations, and I'm very pleased to welcome His Excellency Mr. Paul Kehoe, Minister of Defense of Ireland, and His Excellency Mr. Inia Seruiratu, Minister of Defense for National Security and Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Fiji. The minister from Fiji is unfortunately currently stuck in an elevator. We have been told that technicians are on the scene fixing it, and he will join us just as soon as he can. For both Ireland and Fiji, a commitment to the United Nations and to peacekeeping are long-standing foreign policy priorities. The Irish Defence Forces joined their first peacekeeping mission in 1958, and Ireland is the only country to have a continuous presence on UN and UN-mandated peace support operations since that time. Fijian peacekeepers have served since the 1970s, after Fiji became the first Pacific Island state to join the UN. Since that time, their forces have served in missions throughout the Middle East, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Welcome, Minister. Today's event, excellent timing. Today's event comes ahead of the 2019 United Nations Peacekeeping Ministerial on Uniform Capabilities, Performance, and Protection this Friday, March 29th, and amid the Secretary General's Action for Peacekeeping initiative to strengthen peacekeeping operations. Representing important troop-contributing countries, Minister Kehoe and Minister Seruiratu will offer their views on the vital role of UN peacekeeping today and how member states can help address the challenges facing contemporary peace operations, from supporting political solutions and addressing protection of civilians to ensuring the safety and security of peacekeepers and the availability of well-trained, well-equipped personnel. Their remarks will be followed by a moderated panel discussion, which will include Mr. Kieran Murphy, the Policy Director at the Department of Defense of Ireland, and His Excellency Mr. Satyendra Prasad, the Permanent Representative of the Mission of Fiji. Let me briefly introduce the ministers. You have their full bios on your seats. His Excellency Mr. Paul Kehoe was appointed Minister with responsibility for defense in June of 2017. He previously served as the Government Chief Whip and Minister of State at the Department of the Prime Minister and the Department of Defense. Mr. Kehoe has also been a parliamentarian for County Wexford since he was first elected to the Irish Parliament, the Dáil, in May 2002. His Excellency Mr. Inia Seruiratu is a Fijian politician and member of the Parliament of Fiji for the Fiji First Party. He is the Minister of Defense and National Security of Fiji, and since January 2019 also serves as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Kehoe will be immediately followed by Mr. Seruiratu. Please join me in welcoming them both.
Good afternoon, everybody. Minister, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. It is, and indeed, an absolute honour to be among you here today, and many thanks to the IPI for organising and hosting today's event. The work of the IPI on reflecting and researching and indeed challenging us all in how we consider and approach peacekeeping is invaluable, and I am grateful to them for that. I'd like to also thank Fiji for joining us with here today. Minister, like Ireland, your country has proven itself to be a dedicated supporter of UN peacekeeping, and indeed Ireland and Fiji have together worked on peacekeeping operations, and I want to take this opportunity to congratulate you on over 40 years service of peacekeeping. I think both Ireland and Fiji demonstrate in that each member state, irrespective of its size or its strengths, has a role to play when it comes to delivery of security. Today, however, we are here to consider how troop contributing countries can better contribute to delivery of UN Secretary General's action for peacekeeping. At the outset, let me say that Ireland very much supports the Secretary General's reform agenda of UN peace operations. Actions for peacekeeping intends to mobilise partners and stakeholders to strengthen peacekeeping, and this is what we all need. It is heartening to see, as the Secretary General's priorities promotes better performance, stronger accountability, strengthened partnerships, and enhanced sense of collective responsibility for over 150 member states that signalled their agreement through signing on the Declaration of Shared Commitments on UN peacekeeping operations. That 150 includes almost all of the current troop and police contributing states. It is clear that troop contributing countries want reform, but what role exactly can they play in achieving it? There are a couple of areas that I wish to highlight here this afternoon. Ireland has a very long and proud tradition and record of service in UN peacekeeping. Our commitment to support the UN on the international peace and security issues has been demonstrated through continuous participation in UN peacekeeping operations for the past 60 years. Today, over 500 Irish peacekeepers are serving in 6 UN missions, so we can speak with some authority on the challenges around peacekeeping that this organisation must address. In this regard, Ireland welcomes the Declaration's commitment to greater consultation with peacekeeping stakeholders. It allows for greater understanding and collaboration on mission development constraints, means and purpose. Our operations grow ever more complex, pose greater risks, while the resources committed to them become even more uncertain. We owe it to our personnel and to our people. We are obliged to provide clear and realistic mandates for operations, mandates that reflect the environment in which our personnel are operating, supporting with the resources to match. We are all aware that there are continuing tensions between the lists of tasks and our troops are required to deliver and the resources provided to achieve them. We should not promise more than we can deliver. We should be ambitious for ourselves, but not to the point where we are jeopardising the safety of the civilian we vow to protect or the lives of those we assign such tasks to. Equally, we need to ensure that our troops are fully trained, skilled personnel. Here too, Ireland is playing its part. Ireland was pleased to be able to pledge targeted training at the previous ministerial in Vancouver. These pledges were in the line with identified need, and we matched these pledges with funding for those who wished to take up these offers. Troop contributing countries have a responsibility to ensure that the troops they deploy are capable of carrying out the tasks we give, in full respect of their responsibilities to uphold peace and respect the rule of law. As troop contributors, we must be honest about where are the gaps, about identifying training needs and also the opportunities. Experienced troop contributing countries also have responsibility to share their knowledge, their expertise, which is why Ireland was proud to make these offers of training. Also, why Ireland is taking a lead role in the Secretary-General's initiative, the Light Coordination Mechanism. This mechanism, I believe, can prove to be an essential tool in facilitating training, partnerships and sharing best practices. We must ensure that our troops fully understand the great responsibility and trust bestowed upon them. Actions that betray that trust cannot be tolerated. Ireland welcomes the strong focus on zero tolerance of sexual exploitation and abuse and stands with the Secretary-General in the circle of leadership to ensure that the political spotlight remains shining on this specific issue. Political will and has a very strong role to play in the achievement of peace. Today, the United Nations has 14 peacekeeping operations, drawing on some 100,000 peacekeepers from over 120 countries. It is unparalleled coming together of states to provide the basis for a global peace. Such operations and such collaboration can only be successful if backed by political support. And the word collaboration is really very much at the heart of the UN peacekeeping. No one state can go alone. There's a very apt saying in Ireland, Ní ceart go cur le chéile, which means that in unity there is strength. Partnership is discussed within UN on a regular basis, but as we look to reform, we must not forget the basic partnerships that are in operation that allow peacekeeping to occur. Ireland, like Fiji, as small nations, our contributions in absolute numbers on paper may look small, but such contributions are vital to the success of a mission. In some instances, without such contributions, some missions would not be operational. When we talk of partnership, we need to ensure that administrative and technical processes are flexible enough to accommodate the contribution of smaller nations, and we must have processes in place that support partnership amongst member states as well as at regional level. Ireland has brought suggestions at the EU level that would allow for horizon planning and take into account member states' availability, military capacity, thereby encouraging more member states to become involved in UN peacekeeping. We need to look at how we develop further flexible and innovative mechanisms that would support member state partnerships. The building of peace demands the labours of many. Let's ensure that we put in place mechanisms that allow the many to take part. In conclusion, genuine political commitment is required for these reform efforts to succeed. The Secretary-General has been playing his part. He has brought forward initiatives that provide for real change. It is now time for member states to focus and prioritise the implementation of these reforms. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the interaction later on.
Excellency Minister Paul Kehoe, the Minister of Defence of Ireland, the moderator Mr. Sherman, distinguished members of the audience, my sincere apology for arriving late, but I know that you would have been informed that we were stuck in the lift on our way here. So again, our sincere apology. But it's indeed such a privilege to be addressing you, such an audience, on an important topic to Fiji and the international community. I thank the International Peace Institute and the Permanent Mission of the Island for the opportunity to address such an eminent gathering on my first trip to New York as the Minister of Defense and National Security of Fiji. I think that it is fitting that Fiji and Ireland are in the same room talking about peacekeeping, because of our service side by side in the United Nations Interim Forces in Lebanon, or UNIFIL, for a long time. I remember that I was a peacekeeper myself. I worked in the office of the Force Commander, and the Force Commander has 2 ADCs, and the ADCs are from Fiji and from Ireland. So I had all these good memories of Lebanon. UNIFIL was the genesis of Fiji's peacekeeping. I think that the incident at the village of Atiri, South Lebanon, on April 1979 began that long partnership between Fiji and Ireland in peacekeeping. Last year, the United Nations celebrated the 17th year of peacekeeping. Fiji also commemorated its 40th year of participating in the United Nations peacekeeping. We have been an independent country for only 8 years when we began participating in UN peacekeeping. Across these 40 years, Fiji has consistently contributed to the noblest cause to help secure and maintain peace. Fiji has contributed over 30,000 troops to the UN peacekeeping. We have participated in UN peacekeeping missions across the Middle East, Pacific, and Africa. We have lost 60 of our soldiers in peacekeeping missions, and Fiji remembers them and fellow peacekeepers from other member states who have paid the ultimate sacrifice. Ladies and gentlemen, for something that was not written in the UN Charter, peacekeeping has evolved to become an essential pillar of the UN's peace architecture. Fiji has been a participant in UN peacekeeping for 40 years, and we have seen the changes to UN peacekeeping. From lightly armed peacekeepers in the past, now there is an emphasis on peacekeepers being able to protect themselves, protecting civilians, and sometimes protecting and enforcing the mission mandate. Some have said that peacekeeping environment has changed, but I think not so much. Non-state actors have been around peacekeeping missions for a long time. The danger to peacekeepers has always been there, depending on the mission. It is how non-state actors operate in the peacekeeping space that defines the changes and differences, how they have utilized technology and globalization to reap the benefits by exacerbating existing social, economic, and religious divides. Ideology has increased extremism. Ladies and gentlemen, Fiji welcomes the United Nations Secretary General's declaration of shared commitments on UN peacekeeping operations, of which Fiji is a signatory, and the Action for Peace. The declaration and the Action for Peace highlight the important role troop-contributing countries play in peacekeeping together with the United Nations. When the UN does peacekeeping well, we save lives, we promote development, and we demonstrate across all sustainable development goals. When we plan to do peacekeeping poorly, lives are lost. Politics and development fail their communities, and human development regresses. A good peacekeeping mission at its core is about broadening such spaces in and between communities. This process involves hundreds of thousands of peacekeepers interacting and protecting local communities. We cannot understate the importance of the tools with which our peacekeepers work in some of the most difficult and challenging circumstances. There is a lot that is expected of peacekeepers. They do a lot when deployed. So how do we prepare peacekeepers to do all these roles? The international community and local communities expect peacekeepers to keep communities safe, expect them to ensure humanitarian supplies are delivered to needed areas. They are expected to bring communities together, and they are expected to assist the host nation to progressively stand on its own feet. A Swiss knife is expected to do a lot of functions, but at most times it is barely enough to perform each function well. The knife is not sharp enough. The screwdriver is barely adequate, and the corkscrew may not be workable. Peacekeepers can be compared to a Swiss knife. They are expected to do a lot, but are they fit for each purpose? So how do we prepare such peacekeepers to the missions they serve? How can we make them fit for each purpose? We as troop contributing countries are important in preparing our peacekeepers and equipping them for peacekeeping. Ladies and gentlemen, how well they perform in the missions is our responsibility. Their safety is our responsibility. The UN standards are our standards. This is a big ask that needs to be converted into action by countries that contribute to peacekeeping. Action can be by the contribution of highly trained uniformed personnel, funding, or other forms of triangular partnership supports. But we also need the UN to improve how it does peacekeeping, from the drafting of mandates, the management of resources, the mission leadership, and the performance of missions. We need peacekeeping to be adequately funded. Trying to do a lot with less and less is not helping peacekeeping improve the conditions. We as troop contributing countries have a large stake in how well missions perform. If they do well, we take pride in our contributions and their efforts. We acknowledge and recognize that the sacrifices and resources have been worth it. But when missions take too long, we become disheartened and frustrated. We feel helpless, that we are not doing enough to help the communities concerned. For a small country like Fiji, it is a huge challenge to participate in peacekeeping. It has not been easy as a small developing country to participate in peacekeeping for more than 40 years. It was a commitment that successive Fijian governments have chosen despite the huge challenges. Our peacekeeping efforts cost around $10 million annually, a huge contribution for a small island developing state. But Fiji has not shied away from funding this obligation for a single day over the last 40 years. As part of Fiji's support to the United Nations, Fiji is paying the rent for all UN offices in Fiji. As from this year, it is contributing well and above our funding obligations with US $50,000 every year for the next 3 years. This may not look like much, but for a small developing country like Fiji, this is huge. This is how Fiji values the important role of the UN. The size of our population is a little over 800,000 people. The size of our defense force and police force are not large enough to sustain large deployments of personnel on peacekeeping. Several times over the last 40 years, Fiji contributed more than 1,000 uniformed personnel to peacekeeping missions. But with commitment and assistance over the last 40 years, Fiji has continuously contributed to UN peacekeeping above its weight. In Fiji, peacekeeping has become more than a mission. It has become our national identity. People of all ages and ethnicity identify themselves with UN peacekeeping. As a long troop contributing country, we have an obligation and a responsibility. We have set ourselves goals to achieve in order to improve our contribution to UN peacekeeping. Fiji has embarked on an action plan to improve its peacekeeping participation. We will improve performance. Qualified and highly trained peacekeepers mitigate the risks. They provide better protection to the communities. Peacekeepers are viewed to be dependable when they are impartial, when they continuously display high standards. The communities have confidence in them and are more engaging. Peacekeeping is about the soft skills that men and women bring to the United Nations peacekeeping missions. The ability to understand the cultures, the values, the ability to see how women and children become extraordinarily deprived in conflicts, the ability to interpret early signs of individual and group stress. We recognize that when peacekeepers strike a positive rapport with communities, It contributes immensely to improving dialogue and prospects of reconciliation. That is why the participation of female are crucial to peacekeeping. For positive collaboration with women and girls in communities, participation of females in peacekeeping is essential. To make important decisions about this section of the community, female participation is essential. Fiji fully supports the United Nations gender parity strategy and is striving its best to achieve its targets. We acknowledge that we will need the assistance and support of our bilateral partners if we are to successfully achieve our action plan in the next few years. For small developing countries like Fiji, partnerships are the way forward. It is the new model of peacekeeping for us. We want the UN to continue to recognize Fiji as a credible and regular partner in peacekeeping. Therefore, we will continue to improve in all areas of our contribution to peacekeeping. The UN's successes are our successes. We have other priorities of climate action, oceans, and the sustainable development goals that require our immediate focus and scarce resources. It has not been easy, but it is through UN peacekeeping that Fiji has chosen to serve the world community, which we are proud of that service. Ladies and gentlemen, Fiji remains steadfast in its commitment to the UN efforts to maintaining and securing international peace through peacekeeping operations. And to conclude, I pay tribute to all UN peacekeepers serving all over the world in many difficult conditions in the service of peace. Thank you. Pinakabakaliw.
All right, we're going to open things up to the audience for questions and comments. But before we do, I wanted to take the opportunity to start off with two questions of my own. And the first of these, both of you referred to the political declaration that was signed last year by 151 member states, including Ireland and Fiji. And as strong champions of peacekeeping countries with a long history in peacekeeping, I'd be interested in hearing more from you ministers as well as you, Ambassador, and Kiran, what you believe are the most important actions that troop contributing countries can take to support effective UN peacekeeping.
Again, good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to recognise the presence here today of my own Chief of Staff, Vice Admiral Mark Merritt, and the Secretary General of my own Department of Defence, Maurice Quinn. An interesting question. Since I took up my appointment in 2016, and I've been involved in the Department of Defence since 2011, probably one of the, from my point of view, probably one of the most important things that I do as a minister is to visit our missions overseas and to have engagement with our personnel, with the mission leaders, both on the military side and on the civil side as well, interacting with our troops and understanding what happens on the ground, in interacting with the local communities, the local mayors, the muqtars, and the local people, and that I'm able to feed that back then to the UN, through our own department, to the mission leaders, and I would hope then that the experiences that I have are fed back in that they can influence then what happens in and around policy and when we are participating in missions.
Minister Seruiratu or Ambassador?
Thank you. Thank you. For troop contributing countries, I'll probably give a short response, and then maybe my good ambassador can assist me as well. As Minister Kehoe has stated, I think there are so many things that we need to take serious consideration of, particularly prior to deployment and of course during deployment phase as well. The preparatory phase is very, very critical, and this is where the informations are critical, and of course where we work with partners as well. Because one of the big challenges that peacekeepers will face when they are on deployment is the stress and the unfamiliar environment that they will be deployed in. And it is very, very critical that we have a very good understanding of the environment, the culture, the communities, because of the huge responsibility that comes with it and the expectations as well. So with the pre-deployment phase, this is very, very critical. And of course, the necessary support that comes with it as well. I know that our governments are making commitments, but with these commitments comes responsibility as well from the contributing country, and of course the United Nations and the host country. Let's not forget the host country and all the major players that are involved. I've both myself and Minister Kehoe have also talked about the element of the pre-deployment training, which will probably take away some of these doubts, these anxieties, and confusion, probably in the peacekeepers before they are deployed. But funding is an essential element of this as well, and maybe I'll ask the good ambassador to talk more on the funding aspect and the partnerships as well.
Thank you very much, my Minister and Deputy Force Commander of Fiji military. I also acknowledge Brigadier Beg sitting. I will not get into the military experts. They will speak much more authoritatively, but let me give an ambassador's perspective of the question, and if I can elaborate that further. There are 2 or 3 things I've observed since I've been engaged with peacekeeping is one, on the preparation and deployment side, how complex it is. All troop countries prepare their troops, airspace standards, etc. But as soon as they're deployed, they need to work in a multinational environment, and they're working with a range of other troop contributing countries. They may not have the experience of working with each other, but a well-prepared force, I presume, is able to adapt to that challenge faster and easier, and manage the difficulties easier. So that I've observed both on Fiji side, and I've been to a number of missions. Many other countries are investing a lot of time on that. Second is interpreting and explaining to troop contributing countries who may not have a depth of experience of the specific conflict, about the complexities of the lay of land, how different communities to the conflict position, how men and women position, what are the humanitarian aspects of the conflict, if there is a humanitarian, what are the trade and other aspects that fuel the conflict or are part of the conflict, resources that are part of the conflict. Getting this type of knowledge, UN is, I understand, getting much better at this, but this must really be very much a part of the preparation of troops and missions, as well as in the regular check-ins that missions have, that these check-ins should not only be against the physical deployment of forces, etc., but also against the factors that are fueling or driving and conflict, and whether they are still in sync. And all conflicts these days morph and change rather rapidly and dramatically. It requires new sets of skills of our military managers, of UN peacekeeping personnel, etc. I think we are all getting better, but the journey still requires a few more steps. But that's an ambassador's perspective. Apologies to the military experts on that.
Thanks, Ambassador. Kieran.
I think one of the key messages that comes across from A4P is the whole issue around partnering and member states partnering with each other. And there's an interesting, I suppose, experience at the European Union level, where back maybe 10 years ago, Europe was contributing very little. And a lot of European states had departed UN peacekeeping and saw no reason to return. And Ireland has been working very closely with a lot of member states on the basis that we can't deploy on our own. We need partners, and we need the support of partners. and therefore sending the message out and working with other members of the European Union, we now see a gradual return of EU member states contributing some high-end capabilities, but also contributing boots on the ground. So I think as TCCs and long-term TCCs, we can act as a bridge to those countries that want to return to UN peacekeeping, working with like-minded states, potential new contributors, developing states. Through 60 years of peacekeeping, we have a lot of lessons learned, some very hard lessons learned. And there's a lot of knowledge and information and experience that we are there and can share. And I think that's an obligation, I think, on all TCCs, that they should share the knowledge that they have. So we can do some training and capacity building, and I think we need to do that. The other thing we see at European Union level is this whole thing of developing deployable forces. And it's all fine and dandy developing deployable forces, but what you actually need then is the political will to deploy them. And I think countries who are working together, who are TCCs, and also the wider group of nations that are members of both the European Union, the African Union, and the UN, should be working together to support each other in that political decision making. We talk at European Union level about being a security provider. There's no such thing as a security provider, because you are both a provider and a receiver at the same time. By contributing to UN missions and by contributing to international security, you are also contributing to your own security. So it is a holistic circle, and that's not just for TCCs, but also for all EU member states, and all UN member states. So I think there's an opportunity there to spread that word, spread that concept, that in contributing to international security, you ultimately are contributing to your own, because we are all children of this global planet.
Thanks, Karen. Minister Seruiratu, in your opening remarks, you spoke quite a bit about safety and security, and particularly the concerns around protecting peacekeepers as they're deployed into increasingly complex environments. And you also touched on protection of civilians, and in more and more peacekeeping missions, we're seeing protection as a priority for missions. The peacekeeping ministerial is, of course, on Friday, and in addition to capability pledges, this year's meeting does include a focus on both the issue of performance and protection. So I'd be interested in your views, coming both from Ireland and Fiji, on why these issues are particularly important to peacekeeping today, and what your countries and other troop contributing countries like Fiji and Ireland can do to support them. And whomever would like to respond, maybe you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman. First, I want to state that every missions are different. Each mission has its own characteristic and peculiarities, and that is why the element of flexibility is very, very critical in any peacekeeping operations. Of course, before troops arrive into the mission area, and one of the key considerations of the troop contributing countries is to understand, again, sorry for repeating this, to understand the situation well, and of course the risks that are associated with it. And of course every mission will have its own extraction plans as well for worst case scenarios. But the protection and the proper equipping of the troops is very, very critical. It's not only from say conflicts or harms that come with it, but of course it's the environment as well. Let's not forget the environment. I come from a tropical country and bordering between temperate but then I come to the Middle East where I'm exposed to 60 or 50, 40 something degrees heat every day. So it's that those environmental exposure as well, and this is why it's important that we have proper equipment and protection for our troops, because we can only be able to fulfill the mandate of the mission and function effectively and efficiently if we are properly equipped. That is very, very critical. And with that again, let me again stress the importance of the partnership. And our friend from the European Union has stated this very good. I come from a small developing country with very limited resources, but then I depend on our friends to help us in terms of giving us the proper equipment. We have light infantry in Fiji. We don't even have mechanized infantry. But of course, given the risks involved in the missions, we need armored protection, armored personnel carriers, so to speak. And I remember that through the good, kind assistance of the French, they gave us their Seviums in Lebanon, and later on now with Australia we have the Bushmasters. This is why, because it's for the protection of the troops so that they can be able to effectively discharge the mandates. But not only that, but we have a responsibility to look after the communities as well, the local communities. There will be incidences where the local communities are vulnerable to atrocious activities, and so to speak, and that is where we need to protect them. And there was an incident in the Fiji Bat headquarters, I think in 1995, in Kana, where there was exchanges between the armed elements and one of the countries in the area, and then they sought protection for shelter in the Fijian headquarters, and as a result, it was fired as well. So we lost so many number of civilians, local communities, but we had serious injuries to some of our. This is the protection that it's expected of us. So it's not only about us fulfilling our mandate, but it's about the protection of the very people that we are called to go and serve as well. So this is why the proper equipment is.
Thank you, Minister.
Since our participation in peacekeeping, we have lost 87 personnel. And thankfully, over the last recent number of years, there has been no fatalities on our side. But in saying that, you always have to look back at, and when you look at the operating commander of any, the personnel that he brings out, is that he's able to look at lessons learned. What can we learn from the previous rotation or whatever? The other issue is pre-deployment training is extremely important. To understand the mission, that personnel participating in the mission, that they are able to understand that. From the political point of view back home, is for me to be able to convince government to be able to invest in equipment, that our personnel has the very best of equipment when they're going overseas. Technology and threats have changed so much over the last number of years, and we have to be able to change with that and have the best of equipment. Also, in the mission itself, investing in the mission itself. I know that's for a higher pay grade than me, but I think that is really important. Also, to understand where you go in the country you are going to, the cultures, the gender issues, the awarenesses that are there. And I think that the Irish peacekeepers are absolutely fantastic at, and that is interacting with the local community. It can be different projects in the villages and towns and parishes in the local area, that the personnel are getting out, mixing with the local people, understanding the local people. I think they are really, really important issues, but probably one of these to make sure that your personnel are well resourced and that they have the very, very best of equipment.
Thanks so much. Kieran, no, Ambassador? No? Excellent. All right, so we have time. We're going to take one round of questions. So if you could please raise your hand, someone will come to you with a microphone, and if you could please introduce yourself before you speak, that would be most appreciated. So the floor is open. Nobody wants to. I'm going to ask another question. Please.
I'm delighted to support my minister here today and to hear the collaboration. I suppose my point is more an observation in that peacekeeping in itself is not an end in itself. It's actually a means to facilitate the establishment of the institutions of civil society. So there's so much required in terms of cross-boundary collaboration with other institutions, in terms of NGOs, in terms of the political, in terms of the diplomacy. And they all, I suppose, present the ability to move more quickly to that end state of peace and security. But they also present challenges sometimes in terms that they can increase the risk to TCCs in terms of changing the political landscape. And that's something we would ask as peacekeepers, is that the ability to understand the importance of actually the interplay between TCCs and what they do in terms of endeavouring to create the environment and facilitate the environment for a safe and secure environment is also dependent on other stakeholders external to that, who must, I suppose, have the end state, which is building the institutions for civil society. Thank you.
Okay, and then...
Gay Rosenblum Kumar from Nonviolent Peace Force. Thank you both for your contribution to peace in missions. My question stems from the work that my organization does in unarmed civilian protection. And when I heard about community engagement and civil society, I would like to ask your thoughts on how we can deepen the relationship between mission personnel and military troops and both international civil society and local civil society. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, there was another, Joanne.
Thank you very much, Joanna Meyer. Thank you always to IPI. I'm interested in, earlier at the UN, some of us were in this meeting on water. I'm interested in the long-term prognosis for peacekeeping missions vis-a-vis global warming, because in many hotspots in Africa, for example, we have a lack of water, which is part of the reason why there are peacekeeping missions. So I'm wondering if you have anything to say about the peacekeepers and the different missions having access to their basic needs to water, and how we will have access to water for the peacekeeping missions going forward, because more than likely there will be more peacekeeping missions. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Any other questions before I come back to the panel? All right, well, maybe then I'll ask one as well, which I was going to say. But I think one of the centerpieces of action for peacekeeping, and an issue that I think we've continued to come back to as one of the most difficult strategic challenges facing peacekeeping, is this idea of how member states working together with the UN can support durable political solutions. And the ministerial, of course, is it's an opportunity for troop contributing countries to make pledges around training, around equipment, but I'd be very interested if you have thoughts as troop contributing countries of what you could do or other troop contributing countries can do to further service the goal of political solutions beyond just the provision of well-trained, well-equipped, uniformed personnel. So with those three questions, let me come back to the panel. Minister Kehoe, if we could start with you.
I'll answer the first one. I'm going to get Kieran to answer the second one because I'm more interested in his answer from a political point of view. I think the lady there talked about interacting with the local communities and everything like that. I come from an Irish perspective when I'm replying to you. There's a huge amount of trust between the troop contributing countries, but let me say the personnel on the ground and the local community. Irish personnel and Irish people are very inquisitive, and they like to know everything about everybody, and they like to know what's happening in the local communities. They like to interact, and therefore I find Irish people absolutely fantastic peacekeepers for that reason alone, because they feel comfortable in able to go out, talk to the local communities and support the local communities. And let that be the personnel playing soccer with the local school children or people in the local communities. Let them be supporting in building a library or putting books into a library, as some of the projects that we participate in. Water purification are other areas that we have supported local communities. And I think getting down, interacting with the local communities, that is the way you build up trust. And that is the only way that you can actually really, really understand what the local people think and their thoughts and their feelings.
I'll just address the question that you raised, Sherman, on apart from providing troops, what else can the UN and of course with the troop contributing countries provide for the community? I think there are two. Usually the peacekeeping, or whatever form it is, peacekeeping, peace enforcement, peacemaking, it's just about creating the environment. But for the future, I think one of the critical elements that we need to look at is the governance within the host countries or those that are affected by the conflict, and that is probably a very, very essential element for lasting peace within the area, because we can create the environment and live, but if these issues are not addressed, then there was a mission that we had in the Pacific, in the Solomon Islands, if I can use for example. First, there was the military component that created the environment, and then the police component worked on law and order, and then there was another element that looks at the politics of it, how they can assist the Solomon government to rebuild, and that was the long-term solution. I think that's very, very critical for the success of future missions. The other comment that I would make, and I fully agree with what Minister Kehoe has already shared, it's about the communities themselves. It's about helping the communities, and we can help in so many ways, given the situation that they are in. Simple things like counseling, because most of them are traumatized. Most of them have been under so many risks. So simple things like counseling and assisting them with small projects, water projects, and rebuilding schools, even teaching them some skills, CPR and hygiene, and because in most of the missions, the things that we take for granted, which may not mean much to us, but this is badly needed in the communities. So it's our understanding of the communities and looking at what's available within the forces that are already in the mission area that they can share with the local communities, and of course including projects which will take some funds but will mean a lot to the local communities and helps to build that rapport and relationship very, very quickly. Best.
Thank you, Ministers. Let me just make two quick remarks, and I don't want to take anything away from the great Irish experience, but between Ireland and Fiji, we are talking about 100 years of experience in peacekeeping. For Fiji's itself, part of the skills and expertise that they bring to conflicts come from the diversity of its engagement. The Minister spoke about Solomon Islands, a local political peace process in which military played a very significant role. Bougainville within the region in Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, Kosovo, Bosnia, Middle East, etc. So this range of experience itself, I think, is a great part of the learning tool that some of our countries bring, as well as something about the DNA. I think I really like the inquisitive nature of the Irish, but I think it's something about us islanders. We are generically, we need to know everything about everybody else in a small place. So when we put into a conflict zone, some of those things come very naturally, that you begin to get into the DNA of the local community and what are the currents and the undercurrents, and begin to feel it. I suspect this is a very powerful reason for both of our country's successes in peacekeeping. In addition to that, a third point, and I'm not trying to sell Fiji as a great peacekeeping country excessively, well, that I'm doing, but what do Fiji's military do when they're not doing peacekeeping? We are in a bad day. We use the term a country, we face a supermarket of disasters every year. In January, we may be dealing with a flood. In March, we may be dealing with a drought and water stress, extreme water stress. In November, we may be dealing with a tropical cyclone. Once in 4 or 5 years, any one of these could be major, once in 100-year type of event. And without saying, the military is involved, military and police are involved centrally in all of these things. So that talks about skills that are required for water stress or climate-induced disasters in any other way, ready deployment, quick to deploy, making things happen on the ground without resources coming into play, finding creative shortcuts, going around the rules of military and government procurement to ensure health delivery, understanding how to deliver water and fix water supply, or stand up schools that have been destroyed. And so these skills over time have been honed as part of the military's sort of DNA. Going forward, the minister has introduced a great vision, and we want to say that we are in the early stages of actually formalizing this and creating a sub-unit within the military, which we could term, I hope we will prepare world's first climate ready force to respond to climate-induced disasters. These are core military people, but people who can go into a disaster and rebuild a school to withstand 220 knot winds, that can fix up water supply, and know what are the mechanisms and technologies available to fix up water supply, read health, signs of health problems that are emerging in a disaster, and be able to respond in the proactive when you can still intervene before epidemics take shape. So we have started that. The facilities and the training are being established. There's a regional partnership at work with Australia and New Zealand that is helping shape some of these things. And so that's very interesting. Between Ireland and Fiji, there's another way in which I think we can take this partnership forward in an exciting zone. Ireland is a peacekeeping superpower, but I think the softer side in the Irish is an enormous strength that you bring to the world of peacekeeping, and that's on the peace building and conflict resolution and that universe of skills. I would admit, Minister, forgive me, that we are perhaps weak on this side. You have a lot to offer to us on this specifically, but I think Ireland also has a lot to offer to the UN and to the world in this area. And that really going forward for UN peacekeeping should be a growth area. The Secretary General is absolutely on the right path, bringing peace building and peace operations together. I know that these are sometimes two different silos, that integration is not very easy, but both need to come together to allow politics to work work better. So at a larger scale, I hope Ireland is bringing that to the UN, right inside the UN, in a big way. But at our scale, bilateral scale, I hope between Ireland and Fiji, we can also develop this partnership where we can access some of these skills and expertise in your system. Thanks.
So I'll just quickly respond to the issue that was raised by Stanley. My experience, I've been a peacekeeper as well. It's much easier to work with internationally certified, recognized NGO, civil society organizations, because they are widely recognized, and of course they are welcome to. Some of them are already playing a role even before the troops come into the area. But the challenge, I would say, is with the host nation, particularly if you are new into a theater. That is where because it's particularly where we still have conflicts involved. The element of trust is something that is very, very critical in such cases, and particularly when you come in as a new player and you want to service there. Because in some instances, this has been sort of abused. I would give examples. In Lebanon, sometimes weapons can be transferred from one point to the other using, say, ICRC vehicle. Probably if it's not an ICRC vehicle, so to speak, but they can put up with it and use it as a... this is why the role that the host country plays is very critical, because they need to accept and know that we are in the areas, but everybody is welcome to contribute towards the rebuilding and the attainment of peace and stability in the area. But these are some of the things that probably we need to take into consideration.
Kieran.
Great. Thank you. Just on the first question about engagement with local civil society, I think all our personnel are trained from the minute they start life in the Defence Forces. They train to a set of values. Part of those values are service and protection. And before personnel go overseas, the last instruction the Minister gives them is that he sends them to serve and protect the populations within whom they are about to be deployed, and that is their primary calling. And I think that inculcates a sense of service to the local community. And so when you go out and you visit, you see soldiers engaging very fraternally with the local population, with village elders, with traditional leaders, and local leaders. And that just permeates the way that the work is done. I recall when we deployed to Liberia, I think we were the first UN troops in after ECOWAS, and we sent in our special operation forces who acted as a pathfinder moving up through Liberia with being backfilled. The call home wasn't send us more bullets, the call home was send us more footballs. Because as they moved up, they were engaging with the local population, they were engaging with the local society, they were engaging with children, and building those relationships that the forces coming in after them could work from. And I think, and it's a two-way street. It's not just engaging with the local population for the sake of engaging. Part of it is knowing them, engaging with them, but also it's actually a force protection issue, because the community you serve and the community you protect will in turn protect you. I think just Minister would recall that that level of engagement can go very deep. In our first visit together to UNIFIL in Lebanon, probably about 10 years ago at this stage, I think it must be, we were going to a hotel and we met a group of about 10 of our Defence Forces veterans. And the veterans were out having left UNIFIL probably 10, 12 years earlier. They were out there to visit Tibnan Orphanage, where they had had an engagement and where they were still well known by all the local population. So it doesn't finish in some ways with peacekeeping. But I do think that's a cultural thing to some extent. But it is something that I think is really important. Somebody else raised just a question about climate change and the issue of water resources. I think, yeah, it's going to be a huge challenge. The footprint of a military camp in whether it's in Lebanon or in Chad is quite significant in terms of the resources it consumes, whether that's water, energy, etc. And certainly it's something that we're looking at, it's something the military are looking at, and there are quite a number of projects ongoing looking at how we can mitigate the impact of our deployments on the environment where we are deployed. And I know the EDA have a project called Blue Water Camps, which is looking at this very issue of how do we limit the amount of water resource we use in the camps where we're deployed.
Thanks very much, Kieran. And we've just about reached the end of time, but to finish, I mean, I think it's the fact that Ireland is partnering with Fiji is such a visible demonstration of the kinds of innovative partnerships I think the Secretary General has been calling for at a moment when the need for countries that are committed, that have demonstrated a long commitment to peacekeeping, need to work together, including with new countries coming into peacekeeping for the first time, many countries that don't necessarily have the recourse to the level of training, to the type of equipment, the type of sensitivity to the local environment that both Fiji and Ireland have. And I think your long experience, Ambassador, you mentioned a collective experience of over 100 years. And I think that no doubt serves you extremely well. And I would imagine that in places like Lebanon, local communities really have a sense of what it means to engage with Fijian peacekeepers or with Irish peacekeepers. And in many ways, you have quite a big legacy to live up to with each new rotation of troops that come in to ensure that they're meeting that standard that's been set by the many peacekeepers from your respective countries that have come before. So I want to thank you both for coming, and we'll all be looking forward to the ministerial and to your pledges, but it's really been an honor, so thank you very much.